So hi everyone, how are you guys? Welcome to today's session. I hope everyone is fine and having a wonderful afternoon. Did you guys had your lunch already?
Oh, yes, we had.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, that's good. That's good. So welcome to today's event, which is a virtual World Sea Turtle Day celebration. So since we can't really, have a gathering and meet up everyone, so we are having this virtual Sea Turtle Day celebration, which is in conjunction with the World Sea Turtle Day, which is going to fall on the 16th June. Since 16th June is a Tuesday, and everyone will be working, so we choose this weekend where we can find some free time and and a, and a chat and have a nice chat, then discussion in this virtual Sea Turtle Day celebration. So once again, I would like to welcome our fellow panelists for this virtual Sea Turtle Day celebration. And this event is actually to extend or to answer few of hot and burning questions that were asked during uh, World Turtle Day, which was held around 2 weeks ago. And there were a few questions were pointed out about this session. That's why we decided to have this as one of the first session to actually answer all these questions. So before we move on further, right? So I would like to highlight why we actually celebrate World Sea Turtle Day, and also what are the events planned on this World Sea Turtle Day, as well as what is the topic for today. Is that okay? Okay, so World Sea Turtle Day is a day used to honor and highlight the importance of sea turtles swimming around the world. And it also the birthday of Dr. Archie Carr, who is widely known as the father of sea turtle biology. So to honor his work, as well as to point a day for just sea turtle, we are celebrating this World Sea Turtle Day. And also this is the time where all the academias and researchers will come together and try to share whatever work that they have done in order to share, get more people to understand about this charismatic animal. So okay, so a little bit today. So this is our what they call as our poster that we are having. The main idea for today's World Sea Turtle Day celebration is actually for us to promote our pledge, which I will talk in a while, as well as to share some informations as well. So our first session, which is going to happen in a short while, which is the title of the session is Does Every Egg Count? Understanding the Challenges and Opportunities of Sea Turtle Legislation in Malaysia. So I'll be moderating the session with our four panelists, Dr. Cherina, Claire, and Shantini, as well as Tuan Agustin. I'll also explain and give a brief about our panelists in a short while before we begin our session. And after that, we have Ask Me Anything, a session meant for kids, where they get to ask questions, where we have shared some links, where they also had options to ask in 4 different languages. And the tomorrow session will be where we answer all these questions live on YouTube. As well as these are the links for our pledge, as well as our podcast. So something about our podcast is we are trying very new way of connecting with general public, where we have this podcast system being released. So far we have 2 episodes, where we first episode is about introducing this World Sea Turtle Day and also today's session, where this is not only visual, it's also about people hearing, where they don't have to just look at it. They can listen to this podcast while doing other stuff, while traveling, while driving, or even cooking. So this kind of thing, it's easier to be approached. So that's why we are doing this what they call podcasts, which will be at till on the 15th of June. So this celebration is not only for today. We are doing it on 13, 14, 15, and 16. So on the 16th, we have something special that we will announce soon in our social media through Insta and also Twitter. So I hope our what they call our viewers stay tuned and listen to the whole conversation that's going to happen today. So this conversation today, or the panel session today, is more casual. We are being very casual, so we use Manglish. We use Dwi language, both English and Malay. And if any of our viewers have any questions, please write down your questions in the live chat in YouTube. And if you have any panelists that you want to direct it to, please put their name as well, so that we can ask the question to our panelists straight away, and then get them to answer your questions as well as. Um, so first of all, let me promote our online pledge. So the links will be also actively shared in our YouTube live broadcast, where we also like the opportunity to, where we as Society for Conservation Biology's Malaysian chapter have created this pledge to urge locals or general public to change, to change our way and to pledge not to eat sea turtle eggs. So as you can see in the description of the pledge, where we have explained why it is not a necessary or necessity for us to consume sea turtles anymore. Yes, people had, reasons to consume them few decades ago, and it's, even though it's been a practice few 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it's not practical anymore. And why we are, urging general public not to consume them now, and also we expect people to share it around the link, so that we can get more people to be on our side, so that we can eventually push the lawmakers to make more amendments in our law to get protect these sea turtles at the end of the day. So as I said, the link to the pledge will be actively shared in the comment section, where the viewers can sign anytime. So coming back to our session for today, which is does every egg count? Understanding the challenges and opportunities of sea turtle legislation in Malaysia. So this is a very interesting topic. It's even very interesting for me as well, because so far we have been discussing, even for World Turtle Day celebration, we have been discussing the science behind turtle conservation, the efforts behind the turtle conservation, how NGOs and how government officials are working towards to protect these charismatic animal. But now what we're going to discuss is the laws or the legislation behind the sea turtle conservation or sea turtle protection in Malaysia. And we have 4 wonderful panelists. I would urge the audience to take this very good opportunity to ask as much as questions, which is related to the topic, by the way. If you have any other questions which is not related to the topic, you can also ask during Ask Me Anything session. But we will hopefully everyone focus on the main topic today. So without further ado, let me introduce all the panelists for today's session. First of all, we have Ms. Shantini Gunarajan from WWF Malaysia. So Shantini, she completed an undergraduate degree in law, LLB, from the University of Nottingham. She also pursued and completed a postgraduate master's degree in environmental law in 2009 in the same university. Upon returning to Malaysia, she completed the certificate in legal practice and a pupillage at Messrs. Scrine and was admitted to the Malaysian bar. So Shantini is a current marine policy manager with WWF Malaysia, and she's humbled by the supporting role she plays in providing policy support for the marine program. Welcome, Ms. Shantini. And second, we have Tuan Augustine Thuga from Sabah Wildlife Department. So Mr. Augustine, he's a graduate from zoology from University Kebangsaan Malaysia and started as a career as junior game warden in wildlife section of the Sabah Forest Department in 1987. So appointed as a wildlife officer following the upgrading of the wildlife section into a full department status as Wildlife Department in January 1988 under the Ministry of Tourism and Environmental Development. So he also intermittently posted to Lahad Datu district between 1989 and 2001 as wildlife officer. His various responsibilities including heading Sumatran rhinos capture and wildlife translocation operation. So he was appointed as a deputy director in 2008 and now as a director of Sabah Wildlife Department beginning September 2016. Also welcome to Mr. Augustine to our session. So moving on, we have Dr. Jarina Muhammad Jani from Institute of Tropical Biodiversity and Sustainable Development School and also School of Marine and Environmental Science, University Malaysia, Terengganu. So a little bit about Dr. Jarina. In 2005, Dr. Jarina decided to join the academia after 7 years of working with all levels of stakeholders from various local and international institutions on different projects that involves environmental management and nature conservation. So since then, her works has therefore concentrated on the application of social science in biodiversity related to research to support sensitive ecosystem management and sustainable development. She also have experience and ongoing research interest in ecosystem management and sustainable livelihood in coastal areas. So she actively promotes and assists in the integration of social science into environmental researches at local and international level. So welcome to Dr. Jarina as well. Last but not least, we have Ms. Claire Bissol from Traffic International Southeast Asia. Ms. Claire as a training and capacity building coordinator. So a little bit about Ms. Claire. So she is originally from the UK, has been in Southeast Asia since 1996, but has been working with wildlife on wildlife related issues for much longer. She also holds a degree in zoology and captive vertebrate management. So over the last decade, she has been working at Traffic, the wildlife trade specialist in Southeast Asia. And as a training and capacity building coordinator, she has developed and delivered training and resource material on the wildlife trade for a very varied audience, including government officials and the private sector. So a major focus of this work is on wildlife trade regulation and species identification. So as I said, we have very, unique and wonderful panelists today that each and every one of them have their own speciality. So please grab this opportunity to take as much as, to ask as much as question you guys want. And without further ado as well, we will go into our discussion of panel session today. So first of all, right, the reason of us having this session is actually because most of us are still confused of the law or legislation pertaining to sea turtles in Malaysia. There are questions why there's different between different states and what is the overall protection when it comes to federal, and also questions like what are the, what is Malaysia's role when it comes to international turtle protection or within the region and so on. So to summarize everything and to get everyone, to understand what is really happening, we have our panelists to explain to us further. So first of all, I would like to invite Ms. Shantini from WWF Malaysia to give us a current legislation and a summary of what state and federal has it. Ms. Shantini? Hello?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, Siva. Thanks for the introduction. And can you hear me? Hi.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So my internet connection isn't great. So
Hello.
This goes well. Good afternoon and thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Hi.
Hello. Hi. Hello.
Assume, please let me know if at any point. I think.
Your line is a bit breaking.
Yeah. Why don't, I'm so sorry, but can you please try and go with the second speaker first? I'll try and see what I can do with my connection.
Sure. We will try to go with Mr. Augustine first, and then we will come back to you after this. So we will move to the second panelist first, and then we will come back to Ms. Shantini to explain about her part. So now, Mr. Augustine, are you there, sir? Tuan Augustine?
I'm all right. I'm ready.
Okay, awesome. So Tuan Augustine will share to us what Borneo's perspective on the achievement made, as well as the struggles and challenges they are facing since the state banned egg conception and trade. So I pass the floor to Mr. Augustine.
Okay, thank you, Siva, our moderator, and good afternoon, everyone. We'll see if what have been said about the success or struggle of turtle conservation in Borneo is a reality or maybe just a perception. But I would like to go from the background history of turtle conservation and also maybe turtle eggs consumption, collection and consumption in Sabah. Okay, way back in 1917, the then chartered company enacted a law that is called Turtle Preservation Ordinance 1917. Sorry, I don't have the presentation, but I just give a verbal presentation. And this Turtle Preservation Ordinance 1917 allows the then governor of North Borneo to declare certain areas as turtle eggs collection areas for the native, and some families are granted with license to collect turtle eggs on a between 1 to 5 year period, and this license to collect turtle eggs can also be renewed after it expired. That was then in early 1917 and onwards. Of course, as I said, certain families and individuals were granted with license to collect turtle eggs. From what I can see, there was no conservation effort been done at that time, because the chartered company only granted license to individuals and communities to collect turtle eggs, and certain areas, whether it is in the west coast beaches of Sabah, or then not Borneo, or in the east coast, were declared as native turtle egg collection area. Some people were, I mean, the community around that beach or islands were given the, right to collect turtle eggs. That was then in the early 1900s. Then in 1958, we have a new, we had a new, the then British government enacted another law called Bird and Wildlife Preservation Ordinance 1958. I think they also continued the same practice, declare certain areas in the west coast and some of the islands in the east coast of Sabah to be a native turtle egg collection area. Then they are allowed, the local community were allowed to collect turtle eggs for their own consumption. And those who were granted with license maybe have to pay a certain tax to the government then. And only in the 1963, the government then also enacted another law to manage and and fully conserve turtle, and manage turtle egg collection. The law called the Fauna Conservation Ordinance 1963. Of course, the last two laws, the Turtle Preservation Ordinance 1917 and the Bird and Wildlife Preservation Ordinance 1958, there was no department to manage or regulate whatever. It's up to the respective district officers to enforce this ordinance or law in their own district. And there was no department. But in 1964, the then still the British government set up a game branch in the forestry department that is mandated to manage wildlife in Sabah and include marine turtles under this game branch section. So this game branch section of the forestry department has head officers and also rangers to enforce the Fauna Conservation Ordinance 1963. And even then, there were under this ordinance also, there were certain areas still declared or gazetted as native turtle egg collection areas. There were areas in the west coast, there were areas in the east coast of Sabah, and there were islands declared as native turtle egg collection area. But sometimes in the middle or end of 1960s, one of this native turtle egg collection area ceased to be such a status. Government then decided not to continue the status as a native turtle egg collection area. The islands were the Turtle Islands Park. Now it's called Turtle Island Parks, but in the 1960s up to 1970s, the management of those areas were given to the game branch of the forestry department. And because the government decided to do conservation work, the game branch managed the islands for turtle conservation, and they set up hatcheries, turtle hatcheries on the island, and it was managed by the islands were managed by the game branch of the forestry department until up to 1976.
Computer.
Pardon? Any question there?
No, carry on, sir.
Okay.
Carry on.
Then in 1976, the game branch, or the government for that matter, decided to turn the turtle islands into a park. And until up to now, the turtle islands, which was were managed by the game branch, become a park. So now it's called Turtle Islands Park. But initially, it was managed by the game branch of the Sabah Forestry Department. And of course, during those days, there were still many areas and islands that were gazetted as native turtle egg collection area. As I said, the native living around that islands or area were allowed to collect turtle eggs for their own consumption. But then the government, of course, through the global trend at the time was to conserve as many areas with turtle population as possible. So, for example, the Langkayan Island, Bilian, Langkayan, and Tagaipil Island were also gazetted as native turtle eggs collection area. But in 2002, the wildlife department or the government at the time decided that we should conserve, protect this area and protect for the conservation of turtle. So the islands or the area was gazetted as a conservation area under section 21 of the Wildlife Conservation Enactment. So since then, native no longer allowed to collect turtle eggs in these three islands, Tagaipil, Langkayan, and Bilian. Now it is called Sugut Island Marine Conservation Area. Once it is converted or gazetted as a totally, protected area, collection of eggs by native is no longer allowed. Just like Selingan or the Turtle Islands, once it was gazetted as a park, no native were allowed to collect turtle eggs. The same also happened to Sipadan. Sipadan was also gazetted as a native turtle egg collection area. In the early 1990s, the native around Semporna still collected turtle eggs on the island, and we managed the island since early 1990s. But in 2005, the government decided to give it totally protected status as a park. So now Sipadan Island is a park. Of course, we managed it, as I said, since 1990s, but in 2005, the government gazetted is park. So same happened to Sugut Island Marine Conservation Area, Turtle Islands Park. Now Sipadan is also totally protected areas, mainly for the protection of turtles that land on those islands to lay eggs, and no more native allowed to collect turtle eggs from those protected areas or islands. These islands are the main rockeries for sea turtles in Sabah. So, of course, once they are given protection status, collection of turtle eggs no longer allowed there. But as I said, there are many other areas that were gazetted or declared as native turtle eggs collection area throughout Sabah. But the problem is, after the eggs were collected for many years, the turtle population crashed in those areas, and maybe no more landing. So even if there are landings, it's only a few individual and difficult to manage for conservation purpose. Okay, in terms of the legislation, eventually the Fauna Conservation Ordinance was repealed and replaced by our newly enacted Wildlife Conservation Enactment 1997. Actually, under the law, the provision to declare native turtle eggs collection area still contained under Section 87 of this Wildlife Conservation Enactment 1997. I think Gavin knows this, WWF knows this. The provision to declare native turtle eggs collection area still exists there in this new enactment, the Wildlife Conservation Enactment 1997. So actually, to say that the Sabah government banned turtle egg collection is maybe not quite right. It's just that we no longer declare any area in Sabah as native turtle egg collection area. Thereby, anybody or anyone who collects turtle eggs in any areas in Sabah, whether it is a protected area or any beach or island in Sabah, is considered illegal under Section 41 and also Section 87 of this enactment, because possession of eggs is illegal under this enactment, under Section 41 of the Wildlife Conservation Enactment. And I think our decision not to declare any more native turtle egg collection area after 1997 is just to follow the global trend, not to allow the collection or consumption of turtle eggs, and going more towards conserving the turtles, not just in Sabah, but whole of Malaysia and the world. So that was the decision of the government, not to allow collection, even if under the law we still have the provision to declare a native turtle egg collection wherever in Sabah, if there is an area where turtle land to lay their eggs. But unfortunately, we do not have any area where turtle land to lay eggs, so there's no need to declare such area. Okay, and of course, lately the ecotourism industry in Sabah been developing, and even if there are areas with few turtle landings, the people around there will try to protect the turtles. There are some islands in Sampurna where some individual turtles land there and lay eggs. The community themselves wants to protect because it's a tourism attraction to their area. Community themselves work with the wildlife department to conserve the eggs and the turtles. They set up hatcheries, and with the help of certain um, tour operator, if that island happens to be a tourism destination, for example, for dive industry. And we have been working with these communities, the tour operators, and also WWF Malaysia to train the local people, the tour operator, how to manage their hatcheries. And actually, it's an often to set up hatchery on your own without authorization from the Sabah Wildlife Department. But luckily, we also have a good provision under the Wildlife Conservation Enactment under Section 7, whereby we can appoint honorary wildlife warden among the communities and also the tour operators, so that they are legally whatever they do with especially for setting up hatchery, they can handle turtles and turtle eggs without violating the law, because they are already empowered under Section 7 of our enactment as honorary wildlife warden.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Christine, you still have 4 minutes, 4 more minutes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, even if I'm not a turtle specialist, I've not been involved directly with turtle conservation, but one thing that I really have done quite okay is the prosecution of turtle eggs offenders. I've been the prosecuting officers for the Wildlife Department since 1998 up to 2016. And during that period, I've prosecuted many people who were involved in, for example, the offense of in possession of illegal possession of turtle eggs. So I don't know. I lose count of the number of people that I prosecuted because of these turtle eggs offenses. But during this period, I prosecuted many people, and these people were sentenced quite heavily by the court, and also they were also imprisonment for some of them. And people might ask why there are still people selling turtle eggs, for example, in the Sandakan town. Of course, we have been doing all the enforcement since the early establishment of our department. As I said, many people were caught and prosecuted in court, but the practice is still going on, because I think people want to make a living, even if it is illegal under the law. It's not easy to catch them anymore. Last time we just catch them red-handed with the turtle eggs, but now they are getting smarter. They don't handle the turtle eggs anymore. They just use this sign to be buyer. I mean to offer the turtle eggs to the buyer, so that it's difficult for us to catch them or to prove them in court, because they don't handle the turtle eggs themselves. So I think Mr. Siva, our moderator, that's all I can share for my part, and I welcome question later, if any. Thank you.
Thank you, Tuan Agustin. Thank you for bringing us, the information of how it started, how it was known as the native turtle egg collection area, and into, the state trying to go with the global trend of banning the turtle egg consumption, and now nobody is allowed to take any more turtle. So we have few questions for you, but then I think we should be going to the next panelist now, and then we will collect all these questions towards the end, where we have a question and answer session, then we can discuss about it. So thank you, Tuan Augustine. Please stay with us. So now I will be back to Miss Shantini. Shantini, are you there?
Waiting. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. All right. Good afternoon, and apologies for the inconvenience caused. And I am back. And this time, sorry to take you back a little to the larger picture. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for this opportunity. And secondly, thank you for the patience to all the audience for the lack of my connection. Now, my task today is to entice you to journey with me on a legal journey on what the law looks like in terms of turtle-related governance in Malaysia. Now, we all know that turtles don't need laws. They are bound by the laws of nature, but human activities are the ones that impact upon turtles and their life cycle. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt. Can you reduce your volume a bit?
Oh, I'm too loud.
No, mic volume maybe? Your
Is this
microphone
better?
volume. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So basically, taking you through the laws in Malaysia and how it's set up. Why do some people have this confusion at whether eggs can be sold in one state and not another state? So it all comes back to the federal constitution when Malaysia was formed, when Malaya was formed, and then next when Malaysia was formed in 57 and then 63. So the federal constitution of Malaysia actually decides who can govern, who can make laws with respect to what matters. So this is called a subject matter legislation. There's another area of legislation which is called spatial jurisdiction. So governments, be it federal, state, or local authorities, they can make laws with respect to two areas they're given powers. One, on certain topics. Second is on spatial. So if the state and its waters, so the state waters up to 3 nautical miles, anything within that state, generally the state has control because of the geography of it. Beyond 3 nautical miles at sea, it then falls under federal jurisdiction. So that's just the geography. Now, if we look at subject matter, Siva, if you don't mind, can you please share the first image that I had sent over? Is it up? All right, so now we're looking at, this is a summary, a snapshot of the relevant subject matters that are within the federal constitution. It's called the 9th schedule. This actually divides powers between the federal and state governments in Malaysia. So now you can see turtles have a very special place in our constitution because it's specifically mentioned and it sits in the state list. Now, what do these 3 lists actually mean? A federal list means federal government has autonomy, has power in making laws with respect to all the matters that is listed in the federal list. So starting from international obligations to even shipping and as well as maritime fishing. So these are just some subject matters. So they make laws and they will enforce those laws and they will also implement those laws. Now, if we look at state list, what does the state list means? This means these are subject matters that the state can make laws on. And as you can see, so there's land, there's turtles, and also inland fisheries. So these are some of the subject matters that sit within the state jurisdiction. If you look at concurrent means it's shared powers shared between federal and state governments. So they can either, federal government can either unilaterally make laws or collectively together with states, they can come together and make laws. Protection of wildlife is one of that. concurrent shared jurisdiction, as well as health and sanitation. So now turtles is specifically mentioned in the state list, and it's also mentioned in the federal list as an exclusion. So if you look at the federal list, there is something called fishing and fisheries, maritime and estuary fisheries, excluding turtles. So it's very specific that the intent of the Constitution is to exclude turtles from fishing as part of the federal list and specifically gives powers to states. This means each and every state has the power and the responsibility to look after and to manage issues related with turtles. But this does not end there. The reason I've drawn this table up is also to highlight that Malaysia has numerous international obligations. And with these international obligations, we sign on to conventions, we sign on to memorandums of understanding with other countries. And from these instruments, we also then have commitments. But these commitments sit at the federal government. So the national government has the power to actually enter into these agreements. With that, they then have an international obligation to make sure that they commit to those obligations. They cannot say, oh, at the national level, it's a state jurisdiction, so we will let the states do it. They need to find a way under international law to actually make sure that as a nation, we commit to our international obligations. So from these international obligations, some examples of laws that exist in Malaysia would be the International Trade and Endangered Species Act. So there's a convention which I believe Ms. Claire will be talking about later, but at the global level, there's a convention regulating international trade on endangered species. And what Malaysia has done is they have come up with a national framework law to actually transpose this international convention into the domestic sphere. So we basically prohibit the import and export of Appendix 1 species, which all turtles fall under. So import, export of all turtle species is actually prohibited, and we have that law. Now, if we look at trade and commerce, that's also a subject matter under for federal jurisdiction. So now this is just a question I'm throwing out to you. If trade and commerce as a general rule is federal or national jurisdiction, then when we talk about the trade and commercial activities related with the trade of turtle eggs, does that fall under turtles in the state list, or does it fall under the federal list? So this is where the law doesn't actually create a black and white situation. There's sometimes gray areas which do exist within the law. So this is just to show you a flavor as to the complexity that may exist within the legal framework. Just because we divide those powers up, it does not mean that the matter is clear cut. So at times we will need federal level interventions. At times, states will more than not pick up and legislate for it. So for instance, Sabah and Sarawak, what we have done, although turtles are in the state list, they have adopted turtles within their wildlife protection of wildlife legal framework. So in Sabah and Sarawak, turtles have been treated somewhat synonymously with how wildlife is being treated, and hence it's arguable that's why there's a higher level of protection for those two species within those two states. In Peninsular Malaysia, the scene is different. What has happened is several states have come up with their own individual laws in exercise of their state jurisdiction. Siva, I think you can take down this slide. Maybe you can show the next slide. Thank you very much. So in Peninsular Malaysia, there are two major ways as to how states actually create laws. And whoever said law is black and white, see how colorful it can be. Basically, what has happened when each and every state has the right to make their own laws, this is an example of what happens. So they can create standards and rules based on the needs of the state. And what that sometimes results in is what we call fragmentation, different standards applying in different states. So now we're looking at the two major mechanisms that has been adopted. One is states having their own laws. Sabah and Sarawak, as I said, they use the wildlife legislation in the state. Then we have states like Perak and Kedah that have, and Terengganu that have their specific turtle enactments. And some of these enactments are really pre-Merdeka. So they are quite old, and which also indicates that there has been a strong interest all along for the management of turtles. Some provisions may border on conservation elements, but largely at the very onset, turtles were actually seen as a resource. So there were a lot of turtle egg farms that were in Malaysia in the 1920s and pre-1920s. But over the years, with the decimation of turtle populations, we have seen laws moving towards a conservationist trend. But then now when we talk about trade and consumption specifically, how many of these laws actually prohibit the sale or the possession of turtle eggs, particularly in this context? Sabah and Sarawak, you can see that their laws are generally, they have a very regimented system in terms of legislating for the possession, the trade and collection for turtle eggs. In Peninsular Malaysia, interestingly, Kedah has a 1972 enactment which actually regulates possession and the trade of turtle eggs. You need to have a license if you want to possess or trade in turtle eggs. If you have turtle eggs and you cannot prove that you have a license, it's presumed that you did not get it in the legal manner. So that is actually a very good and progressive piece of provision that is in a 1972 piece of enactment. Other states remain largely silent on whether you can or cannot sell or possess turtle eggs. Another exception is Terengganu. So because of the leatherback crisis that happened in the 60s, in the 70s and 80s subsequently, then we see amendments made to actually ban the possession of leatherback turtle eggs. But it's not been adopted across all three other species that occur in Malaysia. So what this actually results in, when you have differences in standards, some states, for instance, in Terengganu, I'm just using Terengganu as an example here, they adopt multiple mechanisms as to how they protect beaches and how you can or cannot collect eggs from these beaches. So if I have, say, an entire range of Terengganu with 10 beaches, just an example, and by law, I say 5 beaches are regulated, the other 5 beaches are not regulated. When turtle eggs come out, either from the first 5 or the second 5 beaches, there's no way of distinguishing whether those eggs have been correctly or rightfully obtained, and they all end up in the markets. So it creates significant gaps in terms of enforcement. How would enforcement agencies know whether the eggs were actually obtained by a licensed egg collector? We don't know. Can you actually then sell and possess eggs in some jurisdictions? Because it remains unregulated and there's gaps in the system, it cannot be enforced, and it largely remains to be the case today that people do. And that's why you see these huge advertisements and also even sale of turtle eggs happening. This poses a threat for several reasons. One, we have signed international conventions to protect turtles at an international level, but at the domestic front, when we don't have sufficient regulations either to stop, to ban trade, or even to regulate, to control possession of turtle eggs, we are actually ultimately creating a market for something called egg laundering. When eggs illegally obtained come into our markets, we ultimately create a market for it. So that becomes a problem from a policy perspective. And second of all, in terms of conservation, the Department of Fisheries, state governments, and also NGOs and other private entities have all been collectively working together towards achieving conservation aims. The benefit of these conservation aims, we still see turtles coming back to our shores, although leatherbacks have been few and far between. But what's happening? All these efforts are with the aim and objective of actually conserving turtle eggs and the future of turtles in Malaysia. But by not having sufficient laws that can plug the gaps, we are actually enabling markets to exist, contrary to conservation goals and objectives. So that's another issue that exists. So now if we think that, oh, it's so fragmented, what do we do? Is it a state jurisdiction, a federal jurisdiction? And usually what happens is they say, oh, state must do something or federal government must do something. The thing is not about saying who's not doing what. The idea is collaboration. There's ample opportunity within the law in itself to actually foster collaboration between federal and state entities to execute international commitments, as well as for states to rightfully administer and manage turtles. And from an administrative perspective, also, there are opportunities for collaboration. For instance, now we say turtles fall within the state jurisdiction, legal jurisdiction, but only Sabah and Sarawak are the two main states that are actually managing turtles on the ground at the state level. If you look at Peninsular Malaysia, most of the states that have laws, while the law can only be made by the state government, management and conservation is actually being carried out by a federal agency, the state office of a federal agency, which is the Department of Fisheries. So collaboration is already present. But the challenge is, can the Department of Fisheries actually amend the laws in states where they have no jurisdiction? The answer is no. They will still have to collaborate with the state governments to change laws to either ban, to regulate, or to better enhance conservation measures within the states. Department of Fisheries, as a federal agency, they have the jurisdiction and the power to actually create laws for turtles in the state where they have powers, such as in federal territory. And if they find eggs in Malaysian waters outside of 3 nautical miles, then the Department of Fisheries as a federal entity has powers and jurisdiction. But within all other states, the Department of Fisheries, at this point, they don't have direct opportunity to intervene. Having said that, there are still opportunities for intervention. Now, the rule about state jurisdiction being something that only states can make laws for, and federal jurisdiction being something that only federal government can make laws for, it's again not black and white. The Constitution actually provides for ways in which federal government can actually intervene or provide assistance in an attempt at harmonizing laws to actually come up with national level laws on certain elements and certain subject matters. So for instance, to carry out the international obligations, federal government can actually come up with a framework law in consultation with states. Second, if states actually decide that I cannot do this on my own, for instance, if Terengganu says, okay, I want to ban the turtle egg trade or consumption, but what is to stop people from illegally taking the eggs and selling it in Pahang, because Pahang still allows it? I can't enforce Terengganu laws in Pahang per se. That's one argument. So then Terengganu can say to federal government, can you please help? As a collective of few states, we need to stop the interstate movement of turtle eggs. And for that, we need to have a harmonized piece of law. Then again, federal government can intervene. Of course, if all states agree that they also want to have their own pieces of law, but they all want to have similar provisions. If all states and federal territory in Malaysia, for instance, they have individual laws which all say we want to stop trade and consumption of turtle eggs, again, that can also create uniformity in the system, where across the board throughout Malaysia, turtle egg trade and consumption can be halted. But we again have to see implementation. At the implementation front, just banning the trade, managing collection, will also result in implementation challenges. As I've mentioned earlier, in some beaches, for instance, in Terengganu, they use a tender system. But if you look at Malacca, Malacca has one of the highest landing of hawksbill turtles in Malaysia, and it's dwindling also. I mean, from baseline levels, it's a critical habitat for hawksbill. But most of the beaches where turtles come, it's mostly a public beach. If people open their doorstep, you already have turtles coming to their doorsteps. How do you enforce and manage when your enforcement officers or when people on the ground who are patrolling and monitoring are contract staff who have no clear enforcement authorities. So the law can be there, but if no one is able or there's no capacity for enforcement, it again will create leakages. Eggs will find its way to the market. So when we look at trying to tackle this problem from a legal perspective, we need to take a systems approach. We want to manage or ban turtle egg trade, turtle egg consumption. We need to think of it from an implementation point of view, from an enforcement point of view, to take a holistic perspective to it. Now, the law needs to change. It's like watching television. Imagine in the 1920s or 50s, when the television first came to place, it was black and white. And today we have color TV and 3D TV. If you still have a 1920s or whenever the first TV came out, which was silent and black and white, if you still have that same TV, can you actually get a color sound film on that TV? No.
Sorry, Ms. Shantini. Sorry.
So the laws that we have are from either pre-Merdeka or entities. Yeah. Am I right?
Sorry, you have still 3 more minutes.
Sure, I'm wrapping up. Thank you so much. So in order to be able to cater to current present times, laws will need to change, will need to amend. Be amended to actually create harmonization across the states to avoid forum shopping. You close one market in one state, people find another state. So we also need to make sure that conservation efforts are not negated. We are pumping in resources, effort, and time to also manage and conserve this species for the sanctity of the species. But if the laws do not enable conservation objectives to be met and does not prevent free riding or even the leakage of the spillover effects of conservation to actually be exploited, then it sort of negates conservation efforts. Third, we need to think about enforcement, enhancing enforcement and creating legal provisions to enable enforcement. We cannot say that all laws will need to be reviewed and revised to be able to cater to times today. Having said that, legal amendments will take time. And as humans and as people, we have free will, we have choice. So parallel and in complementary to waiting for amendments to happen, we can actually make an active choice in choosing not to consume and not to trade in turtle eggs. So with that, I would say thank you, and I'll be more than happy to take questions later. Thank you, Siva. Back to you.
Thank you, Ms. Shantini. Wow, a lot of takeaways from this session from Ms. Shantini. We have a few questions also from Ms. Shantini, which I think we will discuss at the end of the question and answer session. Is that okay, Ms. Shantini? After the
sure
session. I also have some personal questions as well to ask, in the regard of laws when it comes to a state as well as the federal, where how Marine Park plays a role here as well. So, a lot of questions, but what we can say to our audience is that's why the pledge is very important, because at the end of the day, it's not about waiting for the laws to be changed, it's about changing ourselves. So that's why we encourage everyone that is viewing to sign up our pledge and say no to turtle egg consumption, so that we can use this pledge as a platform to push if you need, if you need any proof to our state government or our federal government, we can use this pledge as a very great platform. So thanks, Ms. Shantini. So now we discussed about Sabah and also, Borneo, and now Ms. Shantini has explained the difference between state and federal. So now moving back to about another state, I would like to call Dr. Jarina. Hello, Doctor. Dr. Jarina.
Hello, everyone.
Yes, to discuss about the in-between state perspective. So I'll give the floor to Dr. Jarina now.
Thank you very much, Siva. Hello, everyone. I am, first of all, very honored to be among experts I see on this subject matter, even though Mr. Augustine denies that he's an expert on turtles, but he's been in wildlife management for so long that at least I think among us he's the only one who's caught anyone. So that's a very far ahead than the rest of us. So I am going to, again, my talk is going to be very easy because everything has been more or less framed by Mr. Augustine as well as Shantini. The reason why we are having this session is basically to help people understand why we're asking people to pledge. So my contribution to this session is actually to share the research that I've been doing with my team on the human dimensions of sea turtles. And we have focused, because I am based in Terengganu, and as we know in Peninsular Malaysia, Terengganu is the known basically the most important rookery for turtle population in Peninsula. So why not we do the work here? And so I'm just going to share with you a few things, because I think there's a lot of questions that people still have, that people do not understand why there's still consumption, there's still trade in Peninsular Malaysia, there's none in Sabah and Borneo. Why do we have disparity? But so Shantini has explained how things are very complicated in making things streamlined, making things the same for different states. Mr. Augustine has shown how Sabah managed to do it. And I'm just going to tell you about our case study in Terengganu, because it is a state that actually has a local legislation since 1950s that has been amended. And because we are, and I'm going to tell you as well what kind of perspective we have when we were looking at the Terengganu Turtle enactment, because we are not lawyers, so we don't look at it from that way. We are looking at more the practical sense of it, how to basically, it's more about understanding what's on paper and what is in practice and why is there a gap. So I hope that will be useful to you. So I'll share with you some of my slides if Siva would allow me to. Okay.
Yes, Dr.
So,
Check.
thank you very much. So, yeah, the question has always been whether we want to ban or not to ban. So for us, it's a question that is very, how do I say? It's very heavy. Actually, it's not a simple question to answer, because behind it all is trying to understand the complex human and sea turtle dimensions that we have in Malaysia. Because at least in Malaysia, we don't have to discuss about turtle meat like other countries in Southeast Asia or beyond. The contention has always been about sea turtle egg only. Of course, we've seen instances, maybe Mr. Augustine will share later, about some turtle that have been caught for obviously meat market, but that's believed to be for non-Malaysian market as well. So let's focus on Terengganu, which is a typical state that comes to mind when we're talking about turtle eggs, especially in Peninsular Malaysia. So I've condensed my slide. This is actually different slides that I've actually merged into one, because I'm very long-winded. Siva knows because he was my student. And I say I'm also very OCD. I like to make things very clear. But I try to make this a bit more simplified in this presentation, this slide if you see. I'm just trying to say that it's very complex, because sea turtles have been part of our lives, as alluded to by Ms. Augustine as well as Shantini, since time immemorial, since the times of our forefathers. Datuk nenek kita, moyang kita tahu, especially if you're from the East Coast, Sabah, Sarawak, it's known that we have eaten turtle eggs for the longest time. And in the past, it has been because we needed to. We used to live in small villages, isolated, so we had to depend on our natural resources. And sea turtle eggs, because they're so abundant, they're seasonal, nesting is seasonal, so they were so abundant, and it was the alternative protein for coastal people. So we ate it. It's for survival, subsistence. But what happened, what I want to make people understand now, is the fact that it has changed. It alludes to the analogy that Shantini was referring to, the television. People now are going HD. Why are you still using your black and white television? You see, so that's more or less the thing, because we don't need to watch black and white anymore, except if you're watching old movies, right? So we don't need to depend on sea turtle eggs anymore, because now actually since after Second World War, after the independence of the country, we've had so much modernization. As you can see, that I was the arrow that points to modernization, because one of the simplest things that happened was better road network. And better road network made all these villages that used to be isolated, used to be dependent on the local resources they had, they were able to get other resources as well. For information, in coastal towns, villages in Terengganu, it is so much easier to get hold of telur ayam, a chicken egg, than a turtle egg during the nesting season. Because when you talk to old people, they used to say, when he was young, this old man told me, if he forgot to come home and slept on the beach, he would wake up in shock with all these black things around him because he'd be surrounded by turtles nesting. And this, we're talking about my house, which is just 5 minutes from University Malaysia Terengganu, which is really urban. So it used to be everywhere. And when they nest, there's so much, it's so abundant. So it was easier to eat turtle eggs than chicken egg. But it's not the case anymore. Now you have telur ayam, telur itik, telur puyuh, whatever you want, because these animals can be, because of agricultural expansion and technological development, we can farm these animals and we can have cheap, varied options of protein. So people don't need to eat the eggs anymore. They don't need to depend on the eggs anymore for subsistence. However, suddenly they can eat other stuff, but better road network also brought in what I call sea turtle economy. If you look at the map I show here of Peninsula Malaysia, it's a bit hazy, the map, because it's the best one I could find on the first, our first road network in the East Coast. It actually points to the road, that the T3 that connects Singapore all the way up to Thailand. So this road is so, beautiful. If you've ever driven up the coast on the east, it's beautiful, it's scenic. However, it really, really shoulders the East Coast. And what happened was, because it did that, it basically put Rantau Abang, which is basically considered the #1 rookery even in the world at that time, and probably they recorded as the only one in South China Sea for leatherbacks, right next to the road. So convenient. So what happened was, when it was so convenient, it became overnight a sensation and created the sea turtle economy. So sea turtle economy means what? Suddenly, sea turtle became a commodity. It was no longer something you needed to use to survive, but it's something that you can use to generate income, which something last time money was not so significant, but now you can actually make money from the turtle eggs that you're not eating, right? So, and I hope you can see the photo that I put here. Of course, it immediately attracted researchers. Scientists came. I've spoken to people. For example, recently we had a session with Colin, who came. Colin Limpers is one of the greatest researchers still living on sea turtles, and he was in Malaysia because they were leatherbacks. He was here and he did research on leatherbacks in those days. But even more than scientists, they had busloads of tourists. I've met a man in his late 70s now from Hawaii who told me the only one time he came to Malaysia many, many years ago was to come to Rantau Abang. He went to Rantau Abang, saw the leatherback, and returned back via Singapore. Can you imagine? This is a guy from Hawaii. That's the attraction of sea turtles. And Terengganu people, because of suddenly their beach was so crowded, people coming from all over, they did something they've never done before in their local tradition of sea turtle consumption. They started to sell their turtle products, in a sense, leatherback eggs, of course, but also turtle tourism. They started to open up guest houses along the coast. They organized beach parties. They organized campfires for the tourists that are waiting for the turtle to come, to come and nest. And worse, when the tourists who actually came to nest on this beach, the tourists came to see this nesting leatherback. Nobody stopped them when they climb on the back of the leatherback. You just look at this photo here. You can see how many legs in this small frame of photo that I show you here. And there's one turtle. They just leave a bit of space for the turtle to nest, and the rest is just legs of people watching. And then see the guy. The smaller photo is that the moment the egg falls into the nest, plop, somebody takes it, and nobody stopped. And this is very interesting because this is really a change of a local practice Because in the past, even when people used to collect sea turtle eggs, the elders tell me that they always left half of the nest undisturbed, because they said that when we do that, we make sure that there's always going to be turtles. And the turtles, we need them because they also have a place in this world. So that's how that was the local traditional practice. There's always been respect with the resources that they use. But when it became a commodity, when it is a market profit-oriented system, that's no longer the case. You know what they say, right? The customer is always right. You don't stop these people from doing the wrong thing. Even if you know it's wrong, you don't stop them because they bring you money. So this is what happened in Terengganu in the 60s, 70s, you know. So what happened because of that? Very sad. As a consequence, I hope you also saw that it was unregulated. Yeah, the tourism then was unregulated, the turtle tourism. So in a very short time, you know, what the conservationists that were there, WWF and DUF, who actually started hatchery even as early as 1961, tried their best to create artificial nests to enable some of the eggs to hatch. Yeah, but they only managed, in all that time, only about 4%. And because of that, the rest went to the market. And because of that, by the late 80s, the scientists already knew that it was going to crash. And it was mainly attributed to the consumption of the trade of leatherback turtles. And so it did. And now, you know, like my generation, I've never seen a leatherback, never. Only in photos of my mom, of my family members, on photos of online, and etc. So that's what happened. We lost the leatherback completely. So from what used to be Terengganu turtle destination #1, we are now the #1 turtle tragedy story in the world. It's the saddest, one of the saddest wildlife conservation story in the world. So, but still, Terengganu is still, you know, but that doesn't change anything. The turtles are still so precious to Terengganu, in the mind of Terengganu people. You know, their football team is Terengganu Nelang. You know, it's a turtle. And on cars, if you come to Terengganu, you see stickers on every bumper that has this, that basically a modernized graphic design of a turtle. And then the Visit Terengganu here until our era is still project the idea of turtles, because turtle is still a very strong and important symbol to the local people. You know, it is still a national icon for tourism in Terengganu. So that's why we decided to do this research, because there's so much, there's people, scientists especially wanting to have a turtle ban. There's some politicians who say that we can't do it because local communities depend on it, livelihood depends on it, etc. But we were very curious because there's not much work done on the human dimension of sea turtles to see what does turtle actually mean to local communities in Terengganu. So that's why we went into a very big study framework. I'm not going to share all of it, but I'm going to just share some of the findings. Where we were looking at what is on paper and what is in practice. And disclaimer here, I'm not a lawyer, so mine is more practical. My approach has been more using the livelihood approach, where we are looking at what we have, what is actually available on paper, and what is in practice, the strategies that people do with the things that they have. So if you look at this diagram, you see the pinks and the blues. So the pink represents what has actually been put on paper. So 1951, we had already, Terengganu is one of the first states in Peninsular Malaysia that actually set up a law about it, but it was only to regulate the trade, because it was, like Sandini said, it was a resource, because people were making money, pajakan, yeah? They can do tender, they pay the state for the right to collect turtle eggs. So that was the reason. But then, because of the total boom, the leatherback crash, etc., the Terengganu state was very fast to basically listen to people who were doing research on this to amend the law in 1989, where they basically stopped the leatherback trade and consumption, leatherback turtle egg consumption and trade. So, and that was 1989. But as I said, it was actually too late. They couldn't do it. However, there were many things that were actually done without by the DUF. Of course, like Chatini explained, the DUF is actually the agent that actually operates most of these activities in managing sea turtle populations in Peninsula states. So many things were happening. You know, they were NGOs that set up hatchery. Then the DOF started to set up hatchery as well as early as late 1970s. And then they gazetted, and then the federal also came in to gazette Rantau Abang, even though by that time it was already, as I said, too late. It was set up as a turtle sanctuary, the first Terengganu turtle enactment allowed for the creation. That's why they mandated to allow for the creation of a sanctuary for turtles in 1989. And then, you know, that many things happened after that. In 2003, it's very interesting. Even though there is a concession, that means if you want eggs, collect eggs in Terengganu on certain nesting beach, you can. Yes, how many minutes do I have?
Sorry, Doctor, you have 5 more minutes.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, 5
So,
minutes.
so if you want to collect eggs from nesting beaches, you can, but you get to have a tender. But what is interesting about the tender condition in since 2003 is that it was written there that if you have a tender for a nesting beach, and nesting beaches are selected from many beaches in Terengganu, the ones that are basically having a good high density beach. Yeah. So those, if you want to collect them from those beaches, you can only send them to the UF. That means whatever you collect on the tender beaches, 100% supposed to go to the UF for conservation. So that's why we call this law, after the amendment, a pro-conservation law. So, and then in 2006, the state went further. What they did was they created this hybrid sanctuary, because for information, since Rantau Abang, there has never been another sanctuary in Terengganu. They have some what they call reserves, but they're not full-fledged sanctuary under the law. And they have this NLC under the land code. They created this sanctuary, for example, in the islands, especially in Redang and Perhentian, as well as in Mat Daerah, I think. So those are special places that are called turtle sanctuaries as well, but not under the Turtle Terengganu enactment. But well, it is still a kind of protection. So there's been a lot of things that have been happening in practice as well. But what I want to highlight as well, what we found is very interesting, is about who's actually involved in this system officially and unofficially. So if you look at this diagram, you will see the boxes with the black boxes with the blue letters actually represent the official people, agencies that are supposed to be playing their role in managing sea turtles in Terengganu. Okay, you have the licensing officer, which is the state secretary, and then under him, he has the assistant state officer, the state EPU, the deputy state secretary, all district officers. And then he has and then there's on the side, which is basically more the policy making advisors, is the Turtle Sanctuary Committee under the Turtle Sanctuary Advisory Council. So, and under that, they have the assistant licensing officer as well, who is includes as well the Department of Fisheries of Terengganu. Okay, and then you have this red. If you look at the red boxes with red letters, those are people who are not actually mentioned in the law at all. However, they exist in the system, such as the Department of Marine Park Malaysia, which now has been returned to DOF and is the Jabatan Taman Laut. So, and then we have the people like researchers like our unit in UMT, the see-through unit, and then we have the NGOs, WWF, now we have LTTW, we have Ecotier, we have so many other people. We have tourism operators, and then we have the licensed egg collectors, okay? And then what is interesting that I want you to see as well are the ones that are basically strike through. These are the ones that are actually they have provisions where they can do things, but they don't. I want to highlight specifically to the one down below on the right under enforcement, which is the police. Okay, in the Terengganu enactment, which was revised in the late 80s, actually said that any policeman can actually enforce the TTE. But so, and in the law and in the provision, it seems to say that if somebody is suspected, even suspected without having anything, the police can actually call them, or any of these enforcement officers can call them for investigation. And for me, that is so enabling, because, for example, if you are a poacher and every day the police just call you to the even if they don't catch you, they just call you, interrogate you every day, eventually you give up, because one day means livelihood for you. So, but it's never been done. We didn't find a single summon or a single report from the police related to TTE. So there's so many, and then the state, for example, they can also deputize other people. For example, if you have find NGOs that are very willing to to patrol, you can actually appoint them as well to help you. But this has never been put in place. So there are so many things that can be done under TTA existing while waiting for the amendment to ban. So I'm just saying that let's look at what we have and make it work. That's what we're trying to say. And so now what we have in Terengganu is the conservation and concession, which is regulated egg trade. Remember that, as Shantini has very clearly said, this is only, the concession is only for nests that have been identified to have an important number of eggs, because and then you have to get a license, because the DOF is following what is basically technically advised by turtle biologists, where you have to make sure that you save at least 80% of the nesting to make sure that it's sustainable. So for them, they have done that. So that's why they're very strategic in the sense that they choose the most productive but very difficult to patrol. They turn them into reserve and sanctuaries, so people cannot touch them. But those that are borderline, that they have density but then very difficult to patrol, they give it to concession. That because when you have a tender, you not only collect the egg, you have to report, you have to collect data, you have to patrol. You basically do the work of the DOF, of the officer. That's your obligation as part of the contract. So there are ways, mechanisms to make sea turtle happen. But then, most important thing is what we want this pledge to be. I'm going to wrap up with that. Is that why are people still collecting? They're not because there's somebody buying. So if Terengganu people, Malaysian people, because it goes beyond Terengganu, yeah. If people don't eat turtle, because we don't need to eat turtle eggs, because we cannot, it's unfair. We do nothing to contribute to their production. If we say no to consumption, then that's it. The collectors are not going to go through the trouble to collect the eggs anymore for you, because you're not going to buy it. So let's make that decision, because it's true. Traditions can change, and tradition is very, very innovative. We have never. That's why we now wear clothes instead of wearing loincloth, because that was our tradition in the past. But now we have stuff, we can cover ourselves, so we don't need to. So yes, let's not watch black and white. TV. If we can go to HD. Let's not do that. Let's say no to sea turtle consumption individually, so that it will make a change to trade. That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Jarina. Thanks a lot for the sharing. I really like your words saying that tradition can change. Yes, actually, we can change the tradition. So many traditions has been changed since, those times. And if this tradition can change, eventually can change and save an animal from extinction, why not, right? And also, just want to share, I also have never seen a leatherback before. I've told my friends, and when I was working in conservation, I told them if I ever get to see a leatherback landing, I would cry. So we have discussed and also listened to our panelists from Sabah's perspective, from Borneo's perspective, the challenges and how they moved from allowing people to now banning, and also the difference between state and federal jurisdiction from Ms. Shantini. And now Dr. Jarina has shown us about the Terengganu's perspective in between state, how they are moving and progressing, so on. And now we would like to move to Ms. Claire from Traffic to share some information about, internationally or regionally, how Malaysia plays a role. Ms. Claire?
Hi, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to do this. I'm delighted to have the opportunity. I'd like to apologize that you can't see me on the video. My internet connection is somewhat unstable, and I think that would just be pushing it a bit too far. So I hope everyone can hear me, and please let me know if my sound cuts out at any point. So I'm going to talk about trade. And what we've heard so far has mainly been about eggs. There's been a slight mention about marine turtle meat being used, but the majority of the talks that we've had today, and actually the whole thing behind the pledge, is all about marine turtled eggs. But one of the things we have to recognize is if we're looking at marine turtle trade sort of in a wider sense, particularly outside Malaysia, we're looking at other commodities. We're looking at marine turtles being traded for their eggs, their meat, sometimes for their bones, sometimes for their skin, and often, unfortunately, for their shells. So marine turtles, in common with many animals which are caught up in the wildlife trade, are traded live, they are traded dead, they are traded whole, as parts, and as derivatives, which are things made from them. So if I would like to talk about a couple of the commodities which are marine turtles are traded as, which don't tend to occur in Malaysia. One of those is turtles traded for their leather. And in some places, turtles are made into cowboy boots or belts or purses, all sorts of different commodities for people to buy. Probably one of the best known ways that marine turtles are traded throughout the world is for their shell. And this generally concerns the hawksbill turtle. And quite confusingly, when people talk about the trade in marine turtle shell, they use the term tortoiseshell. What they're actually talking about is hawksbill turtle shell. It might be easier to give it its Japanese name, which is Beko. And I think the fact that it has a Japanese name, which is widely recognized across the world, might give you the hint that much of this trade occurs in East Asia. So Beko is made into a variety of things, including fans, combs, spectacle frames. Sometimes people make decorative boxes out of it. Very often there will be precious metals like silver put in on those. And they even make guitar picks out of them. I have to say the weirdest thing I think I've ever seen made out of Beko was about 20 years ago in Vietnam, where I saw a scale model of a MiG fighter jet made completely out of Beko. And this thing was huge. It was about, I think the wingspan was about, it was over 1 meter. So Beko is unfortunately traded in a number of places. It just may not be familiar to people who live in Malaysia because it's not traded here. Trade in marine turtles goes back hundreds of years. Dr. Jarina was just saying that usage of turtle legs would have begun as a local and a subsistence activity. What we've seen with many types of wildlife trade is that things that were just had a local market or just were for personal consumption, because we've seen the world shrink. Obviously not at the moment, but at most times it's very easy to get from one side of the world to the other. And it's easy for people to move wildlife from one side, from where it's collected, to somewhere else where it will be sold very, very quickly. And with increases in personal wealth in many places, it's meant that a lot of people who could never have dreamt of having things of this luxury can now afford to buy these. And so we've seen wildlife trade in many commodities become a commercial activity rather than a very, very localized activity. Illegal wildlife or wildlife in general is sold face to face. We've also already heard about the markets in Terengganu and other places where you can go and buy marine turtle eggs. You can buy things online. You can buy anything online these days as well. So wildlife trade is a big thing. Marine turtle trade concerns more than eggs in many parts of the world. So just to give a bit of a sort of step back a bit, marine turtles have very vast distributions. If you look at the distribution for the hawksbill turtle, it's found in more than 130 countries. And the green turtle is found in more than 160 different countries. So it's not surprising that trade in marine turtles is almost global because there are so many places where they occur. Research has shown that consumption of marine turtles and their eggs is thought to occur in 75% of the countries in the Indian Ocean and Southeast Asia. So you can see that this is really almost a global activity, the trade in marine turtles. Eggs and meat, that trade occurs in many, many places across the world. The trade in Beko, or hawksbill turtle shell, is mainly dominated by countries in East Asia, countries such as Japan and China. If you have a look, these things have been going on for an awful long time. Records of the use of Beko in China go back over 1,000 years. And certainly in Japan, these items have been carved and used for more than 300 years. So this is something which is viewed there as a sort of the carving and sale of these items is viewed very much as a traditional activity. But there are also many places where it's possible to buy tortoiseshell items as tourist souvenirs. And there's been a lot of work in places like the Caribbean to make sure that visiting tourists, even if they see Beko items for sale, that they understand that these are on sale illegally and that they are not able to move those back to their home country. So there's an awful lot of effort across the world to try and sort of combat the trade in many of these items. So to move away from a global perspective and just have a look at a bit more of a regional picture. Southeast Asia is home to 6 out of the 7 species of marine turtles. And looking almost at a global point of view, direct exploitation of marine turtles, including meat, eggs, and shells, is concentrated in the Coral Triangle region. And the countries which have been highlighted as a key source of turtles to meet domestic demand, and which are being increasingly implicated as a source of smuggled turtles, which go to places like China, Japan, and Vietnam, are Malaysia and Indonesia, unfortunately. So Traffic's done quite a bit of research on marine turtles over the past few years. Our most recent report looked at the trade in marine turtles in Indonesia and in Malaysia and in Vietnam. So what I'm going to do now is just give you a very brief overview of 2 of those countries, of Indonesia and Vietnam. And then I will leave Malaysia for the end of the talk. So in Indonesia, what has been recorded is that there is trade in eggs and meat and shells, and those items are in largest demand. But there are also stuffed turtles, which is possible to buy as well. Local consumption is often reported from roadside stalls and is very much beach centered. So it seems that many of these items don't travel far from where they are collected. And I just want to highlight a couple of hotspots which our research found in Indonesia. One of those was Kalimantan. Sales of Beko jewelry in local markets was reported, but the main thing that was recorded was the collection of eggs. And this, you can say that Kalimantan is really a hotspot for turtle egg collections. And many of these will end up being illegally exported to East Malaysia, both to Sabah and Sarawak. Moving over, Bali is another center for marine turtle trade. Trade for meat here has been recorded for many, many years. And what they say is that many years back, if you had gone into a restaurant and you had asked for some beef, it is possible that what you would have been served was turtle meat, because this was easier to get and cheaper for them to supply. At one time, it was probably the center of the largest domestic exploitation of marine turtles in the world, and one of the leading exporters of marine turtle products. This has decreased, and the trade has largely gone underground. But we did still find that some animals which were destined to supply the market in Bali were being caught from other places in Indonesia, such as Sulawesi or Maluku. To move on to Vietnam, Vietnam, the trade is illegal, but it still persists. The trade occurs for meat and eggs and stuffed animals. And apparently some people think that if you display a stuffed marine turtle in your basement, it will bring you good luck. You can also see Beko on sale. as jewelry. And some people think that wearing marine turtle products can help to treat their low blood pressure. One of the things that we also see, there is a domestic demand for marine turtles and products in Vietnam, but also there is quite a significant amount of people coming from outside Vietnam, mainly from East Asia, places like China, who are buying marine turtle products while they're on holiday. One of the other things which links Vietnam to the illegal trade in marine turtles is that Vietnamese fishermen have been found with sometimes very large numbers of marine turtles aboard their boats in both Malaysian and Filipino waters. According to the testimony that a few of these have given, these animals would have ended up being sold to buyers from China. So this is an illegal trade. We've already heard about the variety of laws which occur in Malaysia with this complex legal environment that we have here. But this is internationally illegal. And I will explain why in a moment. I just want you to know that the international illegal trade in wildlife is the 4th largest international criminal enterprise in the world, falling only after drug trafficking, human trafficking, and the sale of counterfeit goods. So this makes billions of dollars every single year. And the way that the world regulates wildlife trade is through the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. And this is also known as CITES. So what is CITES? CITES is an agreement between governments. It was started up effectively in 1973. And the idea of this is to ensure that the international trade in wild flora and fauna of conservation concern does not threaten the survival of species. That almost every country in the world is a signatory to this convention. There are now 183 different CITES parties. So that means that they are all gathering together to try and help ensure that trade in wild endangered species does not threaten their survival. Malaysia became party to CITES in 1978. You were one of the first few countries to sign up. And Malaysia was the first country in Southeast Asia to sign up to CITES. CITES covers a number of things. It covers animals, including turtles. It also covers things like primates and birds of prey. It covers plants like orchids and like cacti, things like that. It covers parts of things. So it doesn't just cover something if it's alive. It doesn't just cover things if they're dead. It covers a whole, it covers parts of these items, of these species as well. So it covers skins of things, skeletons or bones. It covers shells, and it certainly covers eggs. It also covers what I referred to earlier as derivatives, which are processed things which are made from an animal. So these would be things like the marine turtle leather cowboy boots. Those would be covered by CITES. Medicine, which contains CITES species, whether that be marine turtles or pangolins or whatever. CITES will cover that. And any preparation made from meat of a CITES listed species. So if you think about how I was talking about how marine turtles are found in trade in very, very different forms, as meat, bones, eggs, shells, as medicine, whatever it is, CITES will cover the trade in all of these. CITES only covers international trade. It covers export, re-export, import, and something called introduction from the sea. So for example, if somebody goes out fishing far from the land and they catch a marine turtle, when they bring it back into shore, if they want to try and do this legally, which they actually can't, they would need to apply for a CITES permit to bring that in. CITES works by, it just applies to species or groups of species which are listed on one of 3 lists or appendices. And it's fairly wide ranging. It covers more than 34,000 species of plants and animals. Now, marine turtles, all 7 species, are listed in the most important list, which is Appendix 1. And they are there because they are species which are threatened by extinction from trade. What this means is that international commercial trade is generally prohibited. So you are not allowed to commercially trade in marine turtles. It is not permitted anywhere in the world.
Sorry, Ms. Claire, just to inform you have 4 more minutes.
Okay. So the important thing for condition of any trade in an Appendix 1 species is that international trade must not be detrimental to their survival in the wild. So the way that CITES works is that every country that signs up to it has to set up an authority who runs the day-to-day convention within a country, and a scientific authority who's responsible for ensuring that trade is conducted sustainably. But one of the most important things a country has to do is ensure they can enforce a convention within their borders. And this is an international convention. You can't just sort of plug in a standard CITES law. You must have your own legislation. And as Shantini noted earlier, Malaysia has a federal law which allows the country, wherever you are, if you're in the peninsula or Sabah or Sarawak, this law applies and regulates the international trade in CITES listed species. So just to give you a little overview on Malaysia, we've already heard about the importance of Terengganu and the marine turtle eggs. The eggs in trade are said to come from within the state itself. Sometimes they come from other parts of Peninsular Malaysia, but unfortunately they're also brought in from East Malaysia. What we also see is that eggs obtained illegally from other parts of Malaysia and also from neighboring countries like Indonesia and the Philippines do end up in markets in Terengganu. And I think Shantini was the one who right at the beginning mentioned money laundering, which sounds a strange thing to talk about when you're talking about turtles. But if you imagine I sell marine turtle eggs in a market in Terengganu, and I know that my eggs came in from the Philippines. If I write my eggs come from the Philippines, it automatically lets everybody know that these eggs were legally imported. So what do? I might write they come from Sabah or they come from somewhere else. So it's very difficult for officers in Terengganu if they're unable to know, or for anywhere to know, that the items have been illegally brought in. It seems that eggs are often acquired in large quantities when people buy them in. In 2016, Sabah Marine Police had a boat chase somewhere near Sandakan. They intercepted the boats and they found 19,000 marine turtle eggs on board. Some towns in East Malaysia also appear to be serving as transit hubs for collection and storage of marine turtles to meet demand in places like China. And seizures made in Sabah have shown that many turtle products seized either came originally from the Philippines or Indonesia and were destined for export to Vietnam and China. So I just have a couple of sort of things that I want to say at the end. So combating illegal trade does not just involve enforcement action. It involves the actions of individuals saying no to the purchase and consumption of marine turtles. So please sign the pledge. It's an easy thing to do. I did it earlier. It didn't hurt at all. And the final thing I would like to say is a memory I have of a workshop I did some years ago in the Philippines on marine turtle trade. And we had visiting scientists came over from America who worked in Hawaii. And the final slide of her presentation, the one where you write thank you, she had a photograph of what to me and everybody else in the room looked like a dead turtle lolling about on the beach. So after she'd finished, I stuck my hand up and I said, could you explain what's happening on that picture? And she said that the protection in Hawaii is so good that the turtles feel so comfortable knowing they're not going to be harassed, that they actually come out of the water and they sleep on the beach in the afternoon. If I have any wish, it will be the wish that I can see turtles doing that on Malaysian beaches someday. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire, for that wonderful session. I wish too one day that we have that kind of protection in Malaysia, where we get to see our beach turtles resting on the beaches. So we have finished the panel session where all of our panelists have shared their session, their experience and also work with us, and also shed some light on different laws and legislation in Malaysia. So now it's time for a question and answer time. So I hope all our four panelists are ready to be, to answer. We have few questions popping out from YouTube live chat. So are you guys ready to answer these questions? Hello.
Yeah, I'm okay with the question that's posed to me.
Okay. So
Already.
We will go by different questions by different panelists. So I think first question is to Mr. Augustine. So the first question is, in Sabah, how does the law goes for turtle eggs being poached by landowner on private island or land? Landowners hesitant to work NGO trying to enforce turtle patrol because of their land, they say. So, Mr. Augustine, would you like to, answer this question probably in short sentences, because we would like to have lots of questions in our session.
Okay, thank you, Siva. As I said, most of the major rockeries in Sabah are now protected areas, and nobody is allowed to collect eggs there and take them out from this protected areas. So most of the eggs that were laid in these protected areas are protected there. But we have areas where we have this what we call once in a while turtles land in this area and lay eggs. And of course, sometimes these people who may stay near this beach or in the islands, they collect the eggs. And unfortunately, we cannot be everywhere to protect these eggs. However, we work with NGOs like WWF Malaysia, and we also have Society for the Protection of Turtle, for example, Kudat Society for the Protection of the Turtle. They are working with the communities where these turtles sometimes go and lay eggs on these beaches. Enforcement is quite difficult because, as I said, we cannot be everywhere throughout Sabah, so we depend very much on the community themselves. And as I said, also many of the islands are now becoming tourist attraction in Sabah. So I think the people themselves understand that one of the attraction for tourists to come to their island is to see turtles, whether it's the eggs or the hatchlings. Conservation awareness is very important. Of course, among the communities themselves and the NGOs, we appoint them as honorary wildlife wardens. So it's only our hope that they themselves protect the turtle that land on the islands, on the beach, and the eggs that is laid by the turtle is protected by this community. So I think so far so good. Gavin can testify. He has seen how people and community themselves work towards protecting this turtle and the eggs that is laid by the turtle. Thank you.
Exactly. So it's based on like what Don Augustine said previously, that there's no more native turtle egg collection area. So all is protected. So if anyone observed or seen people are not trying to protect, they can always come to SWD, Sabah Wildlife Department, for further action, I believe. So thank you, Don Augustine. So I think I will pass the next question to Shantini. Shantini, are you still with us? So the
I'm
question
here.
that for Shantini will be, there is a penalty for disturbing a nesting turtle and also for taking the eggs, but development on nesting beaches, in bracket housing, hotels and malls, etc., is a major impediment to conservation. Is there any legislation existing or planned that protect verified turtle nesting beaches outside of national parks?
Wow. Okay. So that's a very good question, and it's a difficult one to answer. So the idea is now we are moving towards, so there's something called the National Physical Plan. And in National Physical Plan, it's a spatial plan that identifies areas which are of environmental sensitivity. And these areas are generally, if you want to develop these areas, it has to adhere to very strict guidelines. Now, how far these plans at the national level, again, I have to remind you, this national plan is developed by Plan Malaysia at the federal level, and then it's localized by states and local authorities via their state planning processes. And in those measures, they have to adhere to guidelines as to what can happen and cannot happen on those lands. Problem it is in various areas. For instance, in some parts of Malacca, a lot of those coastal beach lands are, if I'm not mistaken, are mostly privately owned. So it's already taken up. And in some areas, states have power and jurisdiction over how they manage those lands. So until and unless those areas are designated under either the National Land Code as a reserve land or any other form of parks, or protected and gazetted as to how forests are protected as protected areas, the actual protection of the nesting beach is a threat and is a challenge. So we do see a lot of reclamations threatening key nesting beaches, and that's something that we would like to address and we are working on as well. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Shantini. So, and also to, while we are answering questions, we would like to have all the panelists, if you can share your email with us, that we will put it in our YouTube chat, where if any of the questions were unanswered, these questions can be directly, they can directly email you so that you can directly answer them as well, if that's okay. So we will take the third question to all panelists. Anyone can jump in and answer this question. Taking assumption, if it is known that the egg sold in Peninsula came from Sabah, if it is, can it be confiscated, as it's known that it was harvested and taken out of Sabah illegally? Can anyone answer this by legal or any?
Hi, I will take a crack at it. So there's always this notion that they don't want to label the eggs as coming from Philippines because of CITES. And it's safer to say that the eggs came from Terengganu or possibly even Sabah. Now, the idea is when you sell something, for you to be able to transfer possession of property of a goods or a good or a commodity being sold from me seller to you buyer, I must first have the right to transfer the property to you, or this commodity, in this case the egg. If it's been acquired illegally, technically speaking, I don't have the authority to be selling these goods because it's illegal. So then there are other notions of accountability that are here. So now, do licensing conditions or are trade premises being monitored, that all goods being sold must have been acquired from legal means? That accountability standard, is it being checked and monitored? That's a question to be asked. But my former answer still stands, that yes, there is an issue with legality as to how it's procured. How it's going to be confiscated or not, that is a modality that needs to be examine further, but that's a very good question. I thank whoever who asked that question. This is something as how we said, not just the police, but even Ministry of Domestic Trade and other entities enforcing laws related to trade's description. When you advertise a good and with respect to the actual selling of the goods, was it legally acquired? How can this be enforced? That's something that needs to be addressed. Thank you.
So
Okay.
to be safe, sorry, yes, sir.
Can
Yes,
I
Madam Agustin.
also respond to that? In the case of Sabah, it's a straightforward case. I think there are only 3 totally protected species in Sabah: marine turtle, totally protected species Sabah, and we all know that taking turtle eggs is illegal in Sabah. So wherever it come from, once you are found in possession, it's illegal. Whether it's come from Sabah or from other countries, as long as it is the product or the eggs of totally protected in Sabah, and we legally we can take legal action on those found in possession of those eggs. So no question about that. We can take action. It's all depends on the law that is enforced in that state and in this case, if it is found in Sabah, it's illegal and we can confiscate. Thank you.
Okay.
Can
Thank
I
you, sir.
also
So
comment? Can I also comment a
yes.
bit? This is a question. I think Shantini knows this question. She knows me for a bit, and she knows that this has always been my burning question. And her answer is very comforting. And having heard from Tuan Agustini, I'm even more comforted. But I throw this back to people who's asking the question. I'm saying this is very typical of Malaysian. When we see something, we don't want to be the one to take action because we are born to be respectful to others. I will just share with you, for example, when I go to the marine park, I'm always the person who's screaming at the guy who's standing on the coral. And he will look at me, why are you saying this? You're not a marine park officer. I say, I don't have to be a marine park officer to tell you it's wrong. So if now that you've heard Mr. Augustine saying that, well, Sabah is illegal. And then Shantini saying that if it's illegally acquired, there is a legal issue here. So for that reason, if you see an egg, wherever it is, because in Terengganu, they do that as well, just know that you are doing something illegal, you are supporting an illegal trade. So don't. So whether the enforcement will come and do this, I think this is another session where we have to engage and see the formality, because I was wondering we need deputization or not. But let's take action into our hands. You see Sabah egg, tell them off.
So, so to put it in a simple way, it is really protected in Sabah. So if it's sold in Sabah, they can be taken action. But there is a very loose law in Peninsula. So if anyone have a turtle egg and they label it Sabah, we're not saying it's from Sabah, but they label it Sabah, there is no platform for us to actually report to it, or legally they can be fined or prosecuted based on that. What we can do as consumer or public with concern is just ask them not to do it. That's kind of that's how simply to put it at this moment. Am I correct, or yeah?
I would say that there is no platform. I think we need to actually, like how earlier Dr. Jarina was saying that the police have powers with respect to certain enforcement, but they've never seen a single case. This comes down to consumerism and domestic trade. And I said trade is a federal issue. So now if it's being advertised, if advertising of trade of something that's illegal is happening, there should be a platform. The platform should be with, again, Ministry of Domestic Trade. So 2 things you can do. One is, as Dr. Jarina says, you can don't layan this vendors, or ask them, Sabah illegal, how do you get illegal product? You can ask them that outright. 3, you can just call and ask Ministry of Domestic Trade, I'm seeing this, or you call your local council council, your see if it's PASA, you call the PASA local council and say, I saw this, I know it's illegal. Why is it being traded and why is nothing being done? So just actively start pursuing. The platform which is seemingly invisible will become visible.
True. In this sense, I should salute in Sabah's local council. I've been to, I worked in Sabah as well, so I've seen in markets where the local council or Majlis Daerah, people present and keep on present. Keep on checking on every shops in every market area. So the people have some fear of not even to sell it illegally over there. So yeah, if there is anyone from the legal or for enforcement being present, I think that will eventually put a stop for people, putting these kind of things up there. So I would like to thanks for that question. We actually exceed the time that we have allocated, but we might try to squeeze in one or two questions. Next question is for Miss Claire. Miss Claire, is it fair to say that CITES doesn't seem to have any teeth, not only for sea turtles, but also for other species like pangolins in China? Can anything be done to change that?
I think there's a couple of things you need to think about with CITES. One is that this is a trade convention. It is a trade convention, and basically it is run by the countries themselves. So CITES is sort of steered by 183 different countries. So sometimes it's quite difficult for everybody to come to agreement. CITES does have certain powers, and remember that CITES only impacts international trade. So what goes on within your own borders is a matter for your national government and not for CITES. So if a country is, for example, failing to do anything about trade in a particular species, and this is becoming a real problem, CITES can actually sanction that country. And basically, it will tell the other 182 partners, you cannot trade in any CITES listed species with this country until they put whatever situation it is right. So if you can imagine, for example, let's think of a country like Thailand, for example. If somebody threatened to sanction Thailand and say they couldn't trade in CITES listed species, that would overnight decimate their orchid trade, which is worth billions of US dollars. So CITES does have teeth, but it's often very difficult to get countries to agree on anything. So yeah, I think there are restrictions. Changes to the convention, for example, if somebody wants to list a species up from Appendix 1 to Appendix 2, it takes 60% of the CITES parties to agree to do that. So it is always a matter of all the parties wanting to work in the right direction. And remember, this concerns only import, export, and re-export as well. So I hope that's answered the question.
Yeah, thank you for answering that question. I really like this next question. I would like to ask Ms. Shantini. The question is, were there specific reasons why turtles and all wildlife were excluded in the federal law?
It were excluded from the federal law. That's not the only species excluded from the federal law. Correction. Concurrent list is where shared between federal and state is where wildlife and birds reside. So there is shared jurisdiction for both in the concurrent list. Fisheries is generally in the federal list, except for Sabah and Sarawak that have some shared jurisdiction. Turtles is the only one in the state. Why it's the only species in the state, it's a question that it's a mystery I'm still trying to solve. All I know is when 1957, before Merdeka, when they were drawing up the constitution, there were negotiations in parliament with respect how to distribute the powers. Initially, turtles were not in the state list. I can't remember if it was either federal or concurrent, but when it finally came out, it suddenly moved back to the state list. I'm I'm sure the answer is out there. I still haven't found it because I don't have access to some of the Hansards. Anyone out there who has the answer,
Maybe I
that's
can
something I've
just
been looking for,
allude
so
to,
please reach me. And
yeah, so maybe I can just hint a bit. I believe this has a lot to do with the fact that it is a traditional, it's you know, we consume, of course, normal people consume turtle eggs for consumption, for subsistence, but for the longest time, it has also been something like a delicacy for the upper class. You see this in Borneo as well. If you look I've seen reports from the times of the Raja, the White Raja, them explaining about, you know, how they had squabbles with the local lords who normally have customary access to turtle nesting beaches, because that was their privilege. That was something that was given by the Sulu king or the Bruneian king to them. And it's the same thing in Peninsula. That was an area where it was something that was granted by the king to certain favored chiefs or whatever. For example, I can tell you in Redang, the old people tell me that the tok bak, the batin has, or what they call their penghulu, has always been the richest man, because he has access to all the turtle eggs. He gets the money for every sold, because everyone else eat for subsistence, but for the higher class, that was also to make money, because they had different needs than, and you know, we came out from a peasant economy, right? So they were the ruling class, and there's the rest of us. So this was a privilege of the ruling class. And I think that actually would have something to do with the fact that it remained in the state list.
yeah, Dr. Jar, that's right. So there's a lot of articles you can find that allude to the fact that it's closely linked to tradition. But yeah, so that's the only link I can find so far. You're right, Dr. Jarina. Thank you.
Thank you. So one more last question before we end today's session. So also for Ms. Shantini. So what is the progress so far in terms of the harmonization of legislation between state and federal? What is the progress so far in the term of harmonization of legislation between states and federal?
I believe the best person to answer this question would be the national authority, which would be Department of Fisheries Malaysia. I am in no power or position to answer on their behalf, but what I can say is, by virtue of our international agreements and our commitments under one, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and two, with respect to signing on to the Convention on Migratory Species Memorandum of Understanding, we have a national plan of action on the conservation of sea turtles. So there are several action points that have been identified, one of it being to harmonize and to sort of streamline legislation in the nation. So certain activities have been highlighted, but this national plan of action is in need of review and has been going on, has been reviewed for some time. Beyond that, I think there are initiatives, again, because it's a state matter. DOF has been doing their best in trying to manage this, administer it at the state level, but I think it's very important for federal and state governments to have more communication and more discussions on this matter to get both parties to cooperate. That's all I can say with respect to this, because we do need harmonization. Thank you.
So thank you, Ms. Shantini. So that marks the end of our session. So there are a few questions that is not been answered because of lack of time. So we have shared the email of our panelists in our what they call live chat at YouTube. So those who have more questions, or those who have questions in the future after the session, if you watch it again, you can email it to our panelists, and I hope the panelists can answer them. Are you guys okay with that?
Sure.
You can answer those questions. And I also would like to remind once again our viewers that we have our online pledge that we would like to highlight to you guys, that please sign up for this pledge and pledge that you will not say no to turtle egg, tanak telur penyu, so that we can eventually don't have to wait for the law to change, and we can change ourselves before the law. So laws are there to enforce and to force, but we, if eventually change ourselves, we don't have to wait for the law, and the law can slowly change because it's going to take lots of time. So the outcome of today's session is we get to understand that it's always complicated to make a new or to amend the law, and it might take longer than expected, right? But we just shouldn't just blame the government or law imperfection, because if we keep on blaming it, it's going to be it will be so on that we will be keep on blaming on it. So as an individual level, we can do something. We can voice out by ourselves. We can sign this petition for us to move forward. So let's lead the lawmakers. Even without the law, we can change our behavior. That's what we want to, to say to our viewers at the end of the day. It's not all about law, it's also about us as well. So panelists, please stay in the call once we have stopped our live broadcast, so that we can take our group pictures. And as well as to our audience, please stay tuned. Tomorrow we have Ask Me Anything session, so please don't forget to watch that. So that's all from me. Panelists, you guys want to say anything before we end?
I would like to say thank you for listening to us, and thank you as well to other panelists, to my co-panelists. And please, please, please sign the pledge. We want to show that Malaysians do care about our sea turtles because they are our heritage.
None from me. I'm all right.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. And yes, sign the petition, sign the pledge, but also voice out, because we also still need the laws. The rate at which evolution is happening with respect to trade, we started from trade subsistence to markets to now online digital markets. So now we need laws and we need action urgently. So thank you very much for this panel and to all of you.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo what everybody else has already said. Sign the pledge, but I'd also like to say, please share it on your social media, so that those people who weren't able to join us today can find out and take part as well.
So thank you very much, guys. Thank you.